Hello Queer Spirits and Fabulous Spirits, and welcome back to our Fan Friday video. Today is a little different because we hit a pretty huge milestone for me, 500 subs, which is pretty insane. So thank you all so much for the love and support. And I went ahead and made a few posts for featuring a questionnaire, and so many of you had some amazing questions that I'm excited to share and answer today. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these questions. Our first question is from JJ Comics. Hi Jake. If you don't know him, he's my boss and the author of another comic that I illustrate known as The Last Bus Home. We just finished a Kickstarter for it, and we will be moving into issue 5 pretty freaking soon. So, he asked, what was the first comic you ever drew? Sadly, I don't remember the very first one, as looking back and digging through all of my old art in the garage, I did a lot. There was a lot of drawing and comicking in my past, and at the time, I was obsessed with IDW publishing, and used comics from that publishing company to teach myself how to draw. I do have one comic book that I recall vividly, though, that I'm pretty proud of, and I had totally forgotten about until you asked this question. I don't remember the name, and I remember it was like centered around a silly little story around the character known as Eritrea, which back then I had no clue, but was basically my persona. I remember some details about going on some kind of perilous quest or adventure to retrieve some kind of artifact, and Eritrea making friends and enemies along the way. I spent my entire trip at Camp Immokalee making this little comic, which I then at the very end of the camp stapled together and made into a little book. I remember sitting on the floor making it on the seat of a chair, typical me, doing things in the middle of what could be considered a prom-like dance of some kind, because at the end of summer camp they always orchestrated some sort of dance and celebratory party where you had to dress up and find someone to dance with. I was not that person. And thankfully, I was incredibly young at the time. I'd say no more than 7 or 8 years old, and very uninterested in the festivities, and would rather sit down and make a comic book in the middle of all of it. I have no idea where the hell I got the stapler either, by the way. I have a hunch I asked the counselor or something, and they surprisingly just gave it to me in the middle of all that. So yeah, that's my first memory of a finished comic I ever made. Alright, so that was JJ Comics. Jake, thank you so much for asking that question. We're going to go ahead and now move on to the next question, which was from Darren Hayes, who is the author of Beyond the Shady Meadows. And they asked, who was the first character you came up with in Starfish Lovers? It was actually both Pinky and Inky together. Originally, when I was designing them, they weren't supposed to be anything more than Space Cat stickers for my Etsy. At the time, I was just trying to figure out different fun themes for sticker ideas, and while brainstorming with my friend at the time, we went a little overboard with the idea, and that eventually became the start for Starfish Lovers. It went from stickers to a short children's book to a short comic to not so short comic. Thank you so much, Darren, for asking that question. And we're going to go ahead now and move on to the next one, which is from I Hate Fridays, who's the author of the comic Not So Typical Magical Girls. So funny enough, the first question kind of leads into this one, and I Hate Fridays asked, how did you come up with all of your lore? So various parts of the lore honestly begin with asking questions regarding the function of one thing or another. So, for instance, when I first started working on Starfish Lovers, my biggest question at the time was, what would the world be like without a sun? I wanted it to be realistic. I wanted a very logical explanation for it so I could better build the world around it along with societies and cultures. Because a culture without the regular presence of a sun would function very differently to how we do with our sun. World building for me is finding answers to the why. Why does the particular animal have an adaptation for horns, or for camouflage, or for spitting acid? What drove that species evolutionarily to arrive at that outcome? Or even better yet, why does this particular culture find a certain herb to be sacred? Why do they worship spirits over gods, or vice versa? What is the purpose behind a specific festival? Does the season that festival is held in influence the meaning behind it? Kind of think of it like a 4-year-old asking why to every single question you can throw at them, and instead of getting frustrated with them, you take the time to answer every single one. You seek out the origin of a phrase or a word or a tradition to better understand the purpose behind it. And when you understand something's origin, you can better write the culture and people around it with greater depth and color. So overall, I get my information from the real world. I research and study. I say research very loosely, by the way. I'm not in any way a trained researcher. But I study and ask questions, and generally the questions I ask lead me to an outcome or a fact that I never knew about before. And then I find a way to weave it into the story. Outside of this, there are some things I've recycled from other stories, especially ones from my D&D campaigns in the past, such as characters, backstory information, names of places or themes or countries of royalty, things of that nature. However, they're usually building blocks for something else, and are either not often used or reworked to fit into the current story. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question, which was given by That One Comic Guy, who is a very good friend of mine. So, That One Comic Guy says, my question, what is your process for creating the animals of Starfish Lovers? Not counting the fan-submitted ones, of course. So, I'm here for all of the world-building questions. Thank you, Comic. If you don't know, they're a voice actor and a comics enthusiast. You can watch them on Twitch as they play games and practice their voice acting with storytime comic readings. So, generally, when I start working on a monster, I have some kind of mashup in mind. Let's go ahead and take an example from a creature I've made in the past already. My original design concept for the Ragnos was a merge of a spider and a shark into one creature. Two of the beasts I'm most afraid of, mind you. But I think at the time I had been playing around with the design, scrolling through Pinterest and piecemealing parts of references that I liked and thought were either cool or could work for the creature I was going for. After that, I find this to be ass backwards, by the way, so sometimes I'll reverse this process. But I'll seek out the various species within those mashup choices. So for spiders, I eventually came upon the diving bell spider. I was looking specifically for aquatic-based spiders, and overall the diving bell spider worked the best. The idea for the Ragnos' hydrophobic hairs and building nest structures to capture oxygen originates from that species of spider wholeheartedly. Then I began searching through various sharks. I didn't want to implement just a regular old great white, even though the Ragnos can be as large as one, if not larger if it's a male. I started researching, and I kid you not, I typed in the strangest sharks in the world and went from there. That is where I learned about the equilete shark, which is known for existing in tide pools, being able to walk on its fins and enduring low oxygen environments for long periods of time. So much so that it is able to shut down parts of its brain in order to remain alert and alive in an area that would normally kill any other animal. I found these qualities important for the Ragnos because it would make sense for it to develop these abilities in order to not just survive, but also thrive as a species within the sea space, which is a low to no oxygen environment. Obviously, I also had to world build parts of the sea space that would allow this creature to capture lifelines of oxygen, and so different plant life had to be created just for the Ragnos itself. For instance, the Lacuna vine. So whenever I build a creature, oftentimes something else will have to be designed and created for that specific purpose of being linked to the creature itself. Because like in nature, all things interact with each other and have a purpose that benefits or causes havoc to something else in the real world. Everything is interlinked, and that's how I view world building should also function, in order to create a world that mirrors real life but still has a dash of fantasy. Alright, so that was Comic. Thank you so much for asking that question. It's one of the main things that I've always wanted to kind of like sit down and talk about and just never had the chance to, so thank you for that. Right now we're going to go ahead and move on to Aqua Stormheart. Thank you so much, Aqua. So they asked, what gave you the inspiration to make this comic? How long was it in the making before finally putting pen to paper and starting? How does it feel to reflect from this point now to the first episode published? I think multiple factors played into the inspiration to make Starfish Lovers. As I mentioned before, they were supposed to just be stickers. Two gay cats in space, with no other purpose than to be cute, proud, and fun to make and stave off boredom. However, as time went on, and from the influence of my friend at the time, Trish, so the wheel started to turn, blending space with ocean. And this was right around the time COVID was becoming an issue, and I had ruminated on the idea for several months before I was sick with COVID myself. What influenced me to start making the comic was reading Castle Swimmers as a distraction from my panic of finding it hard to breathe. I wasn't hospital ready yet, but the symptoms from COVID were so bad that it was affecting my stress levels to the point where I was overly anxious. So reading a comic was comforting at the time. However, the more I read Castle Swimmers, the more I thought about those two dorky space cats and realizing I had spent the last few years working on a degree that I hated. Not drawing or making comics as much as I used to, because I was trying to survive outside of my father's influence, working 3 jobs and going to school, and feeling like an overall failure because I worried I could potentially die from COVID and never do any of the things that I ever had wanted to do in life. So it was kind of a fuck it kind of a moment, where I thought if someone else can be happy doing something they love too, so can I. So I decided to rewrite the narrative in a way. Instead of it being sad that I had seriously declined in my skill in the arts, I started drawing more and more with the time that I was given. and with COVID being remote for work and school, I gained a lot of time back. However, the story itself didn't shift into the tale of religious deconstruction and trauma until about a year later. When I had focused on trying to write Starfish Lovers as a novel, I had written about 80,000 words of the story and many more world building and planning and figuring out the characters before I had actually hunkered down and finished the first chapter of the comic. By then, I kind of just hit the ground running and it became a clear directive and a rhythm for me. Looking back on where I was then, I really didn't know what I was doing. I had never posted vertical format. I had to learn a lot and make a ton of mistakes to get to where I am. A part of me looks back at who I was and feels happy that despite all of the obstacles in front of me, I pushed past them and kept going. I think especially the part where I had retrained myself to draw again. I was very unhappy with the style I drew back then, and that was a very big decline from what I used to do for Hardway Mountain, or at least what it felt like. It was kind of my first time drawing anything furry as well. I really had to take the time and build the style I have now. Looking back at my current style, knowledge, and skill to what I was back then is rewarding. It's part of the reason why I keep old art for those chapters. I might cringe at them from time to time, but it's a living testament of me not giving up, going through the growing pains and hating what my hands produced, and accepting that it wasn't perfect. What was more important was getting it out there and making it, rather than focusing on perfection. Okay, so that was Aqua Stormheart. Thank you so much for asking that question. We are now going to move on to the next question. This is by our very own Sunseeker, who is the author of the comic known as Finding Meaning. They said, "Oh my god, congrats Nova. Let's see, which character is your favorite to draw? Your least favorite to draw? What's the main crew's favorite drinks? And what is your favorite part of world building?" Thank you so much, Sunny. You're very sweet, and that's a great set of questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer them in order. I had to sit down and think, and I think my favorite flips between Ziggy and Pinky and Inky. Mostly because I enjoy seeing their expressions, be it funny or intense. Ziggy I enjoy drawing when he's indignant or being snarky, and Pinky, as you can probably guess, when he's dealing with heavy-hitting emotions or experiencing pain, or when he's genuinely happy, and also being a snarky bastard. And then Inky, I love to draw when he's got more playful emotions. I love seeing him happy, especially because even though I enjoy wumping him as much as Pavo, seeing him happy outweighs all of the hell that I've put him through and will put him through. The same line of thought applies to Pavo as well. So, on to drinks. Funny enough, Pavo's very much a mead or beer kind of Tom. I even have it written down somewhere that as one of his hobbies, he brews beers and meads in his off time. Outside of alcohol, though, he has a taste for Macara more so than tea. It does eventually grow in him, though. That is ingrained in him due to his culture. He doesn't mind sweet things, I'm certain, but he's definitely the kind of Tom who would drink his coffee black for sure. So overall, he has a Macara equivalent of coffee with every meal and not just in the morning. Inky would be a hard liquor Tom, but he steers clear of it due to family history. If he ever does indulge in it, sadly, he will overdo it, and it's not the best for him. Outside of alcohol, he loves Sokoli, or any drinks that would be either herbal or fruity or sweet, or a combination of the three. So a Thai tea or a matcha bubble tea would rock his world if he ever had one, especially since he's not used to having anything like that aboard the Lamprey. So those would be fun treats he'd get on shore leave prior to the story starting. Ziggy loves Macara, but definitely gives Pinky the side eye when he just drinks it straight. Ziggy would be the individual who would enjoy cappuccinos, lattes, and that kind of stuff. However, he predominantly enjoys teas, especially herbal ones. He grew up drinking medicinal teas a lot due to his family being in the medical field, as well as having Mama Cass as his Noma. Max is absolutely a sweet tooth, prefers hot cocos, really not a coffee drinker even though he lived in Emmerich. He was raised in Mintos, and Moreno didn't force the tradition on him. I feel like the only thing that isn't sweet that he drinks regularly are herbal teas, but that's more to calm his nerves, help focus, or to chase down his medicine. Benna is 1,000% an herbal tea drinker and an avid hydrator. She would try other drinks, but she prefers her teas. She likes fruity and floral teas though, so anything equivalent to peach, citrus, ginger, pomegranate, lavender, and chamomile, or even meadowsweet teas. A lot of the teas that she makes, if she is settled and not traveling so much, would be from what she's foraged. Back in Emmerich, when she and Cassandra lived with Max, she did this often. As for Cassandra, she would be that kind of person to only drink sodas or sweet drinks and very rarely hydrate properly. which gets her into bickering sessions with Benna more often than not. Meanwhile, she'd be the one sharing sweet drinks with Max or helping him get more sweet drinks behind Benna's back. So she's not much of a tea drinker, and if she had the choice between tea and coffee, she would have the coffee with a lot of milk and sugar. The last one I'll focus on for now would be Lafanya. She would definitely be more of an espresso or macara consumer due to her culture. However, I would say that she would prefer black teas, like a London fog kind of girly. So more Earl Greys and spice chais for sure. And on the last question, what is my favorite part of world building? I would absolutely have to say the studying and researching aspect of it. Getting those aha moments as things kind of click nicely or end up having an explanation for. I think exploring the internet for scientific facts about our world, cultural traditions, and numerous details about Earth that I hadn't learned yet are among my favorite parts of world building. A lot of my world building is found in the natural world and can sometimes be explained scientifically, with some fantasy flavor. And so moving on to the next question. This one was asked by Aurelie Arts, who is the creator of the Paradoxum Trigger. And they asked, out of your Starfish Lovers cast, who is your most favorite OC? Thank you so much for asking this question, and I really appreciate it. I think if I were to frame this question with who do I love to write the most, it would obviously be Pavo, especially since he is the main character. A lot of the reason behind that isn't just about his personality or the character itself, but what he means to me. I've mentioned before that Starfish Lovers is my personal therapy comic. It's where I dive into the parts of myself that are unhealed, or discuss topics that I find incredibly important to me. Writing about Pavo and about his experiences mirrors the things I went through in my past. It may be reskinned into a whole other world setting with events that I didn't have to go through, but the themes of guilt, trauma, and pain, and feelings of isolation, they're all relative to myself and what I went through. I feel like as artists and as storytellers, we also take a piece of ourselves and put it into each character or some part of our story. Whether we do it knowingly or not is in question, but I think in some small respect, we do it in one way or another. Whether it is something we care about or feel like we need to express, there is a part of us that exists within our comics and storytelling. So overall, Pavo is my favorite to write, but I still have a reason to be excited and to love the other characters for other various aspects, because each of them holds a part of me or a part of myself that I wish I could be. So I think we made it through all of the questions. Thank you all so much for sticking with me for this video. I genuinely enjoyed answering these questions, and they definitely caused me to really pause and consider how to respond. It means a lot, and thank you all for the 500 subs on the various platforms. I'll see you all in the next video, and if there's anything else y'all want to see in the future, just let me know. In the meantime, just remember to make space, break the mold, and keep going.